The archive is open. Come in out of the cold. Your chair is where you left it, the one by the lamp. Tonight I've pulled something old from the shelves. The 9 worlds of Norse myth, connected by roots and roads beneath the long shadow of Yggdrasil. You don't need to remember any of this. There's no test at the end. If you drift, I'll keep reading. Let's begin. Begin, for once, with the map we do not have. Modern pictures of the Norse cosmos are often very neat. Yggdrasil stands in the middle, an enormous tree drawn from root to crown, and 9 worlds are arranged around it like rooms in a tall house. Asgard sits above. Midgard rests in the middle. Hell waits somewhere below. Every border has a name. It is a useful picture. It is also much tidier than the old sources. The poets who remembered these worlds did not leave us a single diagram, nor one passage that calmly names all 9 in order. One of the opening stanzas of Völuspá, the poem, whose title means something like the prophecy of the seeress, remembers 9 worlds and a great tree beneath the earth. Elsewhere, other poems mention halls, rivers, roots, bridges, enclosures, and roads taken by gods, giants, the dead, and the occasional very unfortunate traveler. The number 9 remains clear. The arrangement does not. That may tell us something about how the stories were used. For a long time, these myths lived in voices rather than books. They were carried in poems, remembered for their rhythm and their compact images. A hall could be named without anyone explaining which branch of a cosmic tree held it. A bridge could burn with color without a storyteller drawing where it began. The listeners knew enough to follow. The books came later. The largest surviving collection of the old mythological poems is preserved in the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda. Its pages were copied in Iceland around the year 1270, long after Christianity had become established there. The poems contain older material, but deciding how much older is careful work. A manuscript dates one act of copying, not every story the copyist inherited. A few decades earlier, around 1230, the Icelandic writer Snorri Sturluson composed the work now called the Prose Edda. Snorri was writing, in part, to teach the difficult language of poetry. Old verse was crowded with kennings, compact metaphors that might call a ship the horse of the sea or gold the fire of the hand. To understand those phrases, a young poet needed to know the stories behind them. Snorri therefore gathered and arranged a great many myths, placing them inside a long conversation in which questions are asked and the shape of the world is gradually explained. We owe him an enormous debt. Without his work, many doors in the older poetry would remain closed, but an arranger is not a window. Snorri wrote as a learned Christian in medieval Iceland, working with traditions carried through generations of memory. The surviving copies of his work do not all contain exactly the same material. At times, he preserves an old poem. At times, he explains it. At times, he makes a crowded shelf orderly enough for a student to use. So the Norse cosmos reaches us in layers: older poems, later manuscripts, a medieval teacher's system, images on stones and metal, place names, and customs recorded by people looking back. None is the whole map. That leaves us with a gentler way to travel. Instead of climbing a modern diagram from bottom to top, We can follow the routes the stories actually give us. We can begin at the empty gap where frost met heat. We can stand inside Midgard's fence and look toward the wild country beyond it. We can cross the bright bridge to the halls of the gods, follow a stone road downward into mist, sit beside the wells under Yggdrasil, and listen for the small animal carrying messages along the trunk. The worlds become clearer when someone moves between them. Their borders matter because a border can be crossed. Their roads matter because even gods have to travel. And the tree matters not because it is a convenient shelf holding 9 separate objects, but because roots, water, creatures, decay, and care bind the whole living structure together. We will use the familiar names as signposts: Midgard and Asgard, Jotunheim and Vanaheim, Alfheim and the uncertain country of dwarfs and dark elves, Muspelheim, Niflheim and the roads of hell. But where the old sources disagree or simply fall quiet, we will leave a little space around the answer. A blank place on a map can be honest. It can also be inviting. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. The manuscript that preserves so many of the old poems has margins around its dark lines of ink, narrow strips of untouched vellum where a later reader could rest a thumb or leave a note. No medieval hand used that space to draw the famous map of 9 worlds. The tree, the roads, and the boundaries remained in the words, waiting for each listener to assemble them quietly in the dark. The tree, the roads, and the boundaries remained in the words, waiting for each listener to assemble them quietly in the dark. A blank place on a map can be honest. It can also be inviting. The oldest Norse creation stories begin with just such a place. Its name is Ginnungagap, said roughly Gin-Nungar-Gap, the yawning gap. It was not a dark room because there was not yet a room to be dark inside. There was no soil underfoot, no sky overhead, and no sea moving between shores. One old poem says there was neither sand nor sea nor cooling wave, and no grass anywhere. But the gap was not alone for long. To the north lay Niflheim, the world of mist. Deep within it was a spring or roaring well called Virgilmere, said Vrgelmere, from which cold rivers flowed. As those waters moved farther from their source, they hardened into ice. Rime gathered over rime, one pale layer resting on another, until the northern side of the gap filled with weight, frost, and drifting cold. To the south lay Muspelheim, bright and fiercely warm. Sparks traveled outward from it. At its border stood Surt, a figure associated with fire, whose later part in the world's ending can wait on another shelf for now. At the beginning, what matters is simply that Muspelheim gave heat, while Niflheim gave cold, and the empty distance between them was no longer quite empty. Where the warmth reached the rime, ice softened into drops. The old account describes the air there as mild and still, an unlikely little climate between 2 impossible extremes. From the drops came life, though not yet life in any shape we would find familiar. The first being was Ymir, said Ymir, ancestor of the frost giants. The poems also call him Orgelmir. He was not one of the gods. He belonged to an older order, born before fields, roofs, stars, or roads, when the world was still more weather than place. Ymir needed food, and the melting rime produced another creature beside him, a great cow named Ordhumla, said O.W. Thumla. 4 streams of milk fed Ymir. Ordhumla, in turn, found her own meal in the frozen landscape. She licked salt from stones covered in rime. It is one of the strangest and most patient scenes in the whole creation story. There is no workshop yet, no tool, and no hand shaping clay. There is only a cow standing on the wet edge of the first ice, slowly working salt free with her tongue. On the first day, hair appeared from one of the stones. On the second, a head emerged. By the end of the third day, Ormhumla had uncovered a hole being named Berry, fair, strong, and mysterious. The story does not tell us who placed him in the stone. It simply lets him be revealed, as though the ancestor of the gods had been waiting inside the world's raw material for warmth, hunger, and enough time. Berry had a son named Bor. Bor married Bisla, the daughter of a giant, and their sons were Odin, Vili, and Vi. Even at the beginning, the families later called gods and giants were not cleanly separated. Their lineages crossed. The powers who would build the ordered world carried the older world within their own family. That is worth keeping in mind whenever the stories speak of gods on one side of a boundary and giants on the other. The fence matters, but it is never a fence between strangers. They bargain, marry, feast, deceive, learn from one another, and inherit old obligations. Norse myth is full of borders, but very few of them are simple. The first landscape, then, was not a kingdom. It was a meeting. Cold rivers traveled from a well in the mist. Sparks traveled from the bright south. Rime formed, softened, and began to drip. Ymir drank milk, Ormhumla tasted salt, and an ancestor appeared one day's careful licking at a time. There is something almost domestic inside that vastness. Creation does not begin only with thunder or command. It begins with feeding. One creature keeps another alive. A tongue passes over rough stone. The first family arrives not all at once, but gradually, with pauses between one day and the next. Soon the sons of Bor will take Ymir's enormous body into Ginnungagap and turn it into land, water, stone, cloud, and sky. The gap will become crowded with useful things, but for a little longer, leave it as it is: frost to the north, warmth to the south, and the sound of a patient animal breathing beside the first drops of water. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Ormhumla did not break the saltstone open. She returned to it over 3 quiet days, and the shape inside appeared in stages: hair at evening, then a head, then the whole waiting figure. Before there were hammers in the worlds of Norse myth, the first careful work was done by a cow licking rime from a stone. Before there were hammers in the worlds of Norse myth, the first careful work was done by a cow licking rime from a stone. The hammers, walls, and roads came afterward. Odin, Vili, and Vi brought the age of Ymir to an end. The old account is direct about this, but it does not linger over the act. What matters to the creation story is what they made from what remained. Ymir's body became the material of an ordered world. His flesh became earth. His blood became sea and lake. His bones became rock, while broken teeth and fragments of bone became loose stones and pebbles. His hair became trees. His skull was raised overhead as the sky, and sparks from Muspelheim were set within it as lights. Even the clouds were given a material origin in the old giant's body. This is a world assembled rather than summoned. Nothing is discarded. The first being becomes shore, mountain, forest, weather, and the ground beneath every later journey. A traveler walking across Midgard is, in the logic of the myth, moving over a landscape that was once alive. The earth was imagined as round and surrounded by a deep ocean. Along the outer shore, the gods gave land to the giants. Inside that great ring, they made a protected place for human beings. Its walls were formed from Ymir's eyebrows, and its name was Midgard, said Midgard, the middle enclosure. The second half of that name matters. A guard was a bounded place, a yard, farm, or enclosure. It was the bit of order held inside a fence. Anyone who had watched livestock nose along a rail or repaired a gap after winter knew what an enclosure did. It did not remove the wilderness. It marked where the tended ground began. Midgard was therefore not simply the planet occupied by humans. It was human space understood as an inside. Beyond it lay ocean, giant country, difficult weather, and forces that could not be made domestic merely by giving them names. The wall offered shape, but not perfect safety. The first humans entered this enclosure from the shore. Odin and his brothers found 2 pieces of wood or 2 trees beside the sea. From them they made Ask and Embla. The gifts vary a little with the telling, but together the gods gave life, understanding, movement, form, speech, hearing, and sight. They also gave the pair clothing and a dwelling beneath Midgard's protection. It is a fitting beginning for people in a northern world built so often from timber. The first man and woman do not rise from gold or polished stone. They begin as wood found where land meets water, useful material shaped by tide, weather, and attentive hands. Around Midgard's outer ocean lay another boundary. There Odin cast the young serpent Jormungandr, said Wyoamungandr, one of Loki's children. The serpent grew until it encircled the human world and took its own tail in its mouth. It became the Midgard serpent, a living measure of the sea's far edge. That image can make Midgard feel small, but not insignificant. Human life occupies the tended middle, a place of roofs, paths, boats, weaving, cooking smoke, law, and ordinary promises. The great serpent lies beyond the familiar shore. Giants inhabit the outer country. Gods have their own enclosure and their own roads. Yet nearly every myth eventually returns to the middle, because this is where consequences become daily life. The shape would have been recognizable on a smaller scale. A Viking Age farmstead often gathered its buildings into a working arrangement: longhouse, byre, sheds, paths worn between doors, and some boundary between livestock, field, and open land. At night, lamplight made that boundary visible. Inside were voices and warm animals. Outside were wind, wet grass, and the road disappearing beyond the last post. Imagine, if you like, Midgard not from high above, but from one such doorway. A low fence catches a little moonlight. A gate hangs from a wooden hinge, polished by repeated use. Beyond it, the path continues into darkness. The fence does not claim that nothing lies outside. It simply says that here, for a while, someone has chosen to keep a lamp burning. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Midgard's great wall was made from Ymir's eyebrows, but every small enclosure within it still needed ordinary repair. A loose rail would be set back into its post, a gate lifted onto its hinge, and the same human hands that worked inside the mythical wall spent their days maintaining little walls of timber, turf, and stone. A loose rail would be set back into its post, a gate lifted onto its hinge, and the same human hands that worked inside the mythical wall spent their days maintaining little walls of timber, turf, and stone. The gods had an enclosure too. Asgard, said Asgard, means the enclosure of the Aesir, the family of gods that includes Odin, Thor, Frigg, Tyr, and many of the names most often carried out of Norse myth. It is easy to turn Asgard into a shining city in the modern imagination, all towers and impossible height. The older stories give something more scattered and, in places, more familiar. A protected region containing halls, fields, meeting places, and workshops. At its center was Yggdrasil, a plain where the gods gathered, judged disputes, and decided the affairs of their community. They built a hall with seats for the gods and a high seat for Odin. They made another hall for the goddesses. Then, in a detail that brings the divine enclosure down to the level of any useful settlement, they built a forge. The first tools named are hammer, tongs, and anvil. With these they worked iron, stone, and wood. Before Asgard fills with feasts and prophecies, it contains the sound of making, metal meeting metal, charcoal settling in the fire, and tools being placed within reach for the next task. The enclosure also needed a wall. One story tells of an unnamed builder who offered to construct a fortification strong enough to keep out mountain giants and frost giants. His requested payment was far too high, and the bargain was tangled by conditions, a remarkable horse named Svadilfari, and Loki's efforts to keep the work from finishing on time. The tale eventually leads to the birth of Odin's eight-legged horse, Sleipnir. For our walk through Asgard, the quieter point is enough. Even gods worry about unfinished walls. They hold councils. They negotiate badly. They watch deadlines approach. Their home is powerful, but it is not beyond maintenance or mistake. The best-known road into this enclosure is Bifrost, said Bifrost, the bridge people see as the rainbow. Snorri describes it as a bridge from earth to heaven, made with great craft and showing three colors. Its red band is burning fire, a defense against any giant who might try to cross without permission. At the place where Bifrost meets heaven stands Himinjorg, Heimdall's dwelling. Heimdall is the watchman of the gods. He needs little sleep, can see to a great distance by night or day, and hears with extraordinary sharpness. From his station at the bridge's end, he keeps watch over the road between enclosures. But Bifrost is not merely a guarded gate, it is also a daily route. The gods ride over it to the sacred place beneath Yggdrasil, where they hold judgment beside Urd's well. Their horses are named in the old account, one after another. Odin rides Sleipnir, the best of them. Thor does not ride across with the others. He goes on foot and wades through rivers because the bridge burns beneath him. That small exception keeps the picture from becoming too smooth. There is no universal road, not even for gods. One traveler rides an eight-legged horse. Another takes off by the river crossing. A watchman stays at his post. The bridge joins worlds, but it also reveals their differences. Asgard's halls have their own names and characters. Thor has a vast hall in Thrudvang. Frigg is associated with Fensalir. Freyja has Folkvang, and half of those chosen from battle come to her field rather than Odin's Valhalla. Baldur's Hall is Breidablik, described as a place of great brightness. The divine enclosure is therefore less one palace than a landscape of estates, each reached by its own path. At night, those paths can be imagined without crowds. A forge cools after work. A hall roof catches moonlight. Somewhere near the bright bridge, Heimdall listens. Farther off, the gods' horses stand with reins loose, waiting for the next journey to the well. Bifrost is strong, but the stories are careful not to call it permanent. At Ragnarok, it will break under the final crossing from Muspelheim. The questioner in Snorri's dialogue complains that the gods ought to have built a bridge that could not fail. The answer is plain: no made thing can stand against every force forever. That answer does not make the bridge poorly built. It makes its long service more valuable. Day after day, it holds. Travelers cross. The watch continues. A road can be worth tending even when everyone knows that roads, like walls and worlds, do not last without end. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. When the gods went to their meeting beneath Yggdrasil, most rode over Bifrost, but Thor reached the same place by wading rivers on foot. Even in the realm of the gods, the brightest road was not the road everyone used. Even in the realm of the gods, the brightest road was not the road everyone used. Beyond the enclosures of gods and people lay places described by distance, cold, forest, stone, and unfamiliar scale. Jotunheim was the country of the Jotnar, the beings often called giants in English. That translation is useful, but it can make them seem simpler than they are. Some Jotnar are immense, some are beautiful, some are wise, some dangerous, and some bound to the gods by marriage or descent. Odin's mother Bisla belonged to their kind. Thor's mother Jord is named as a giantess and as the earth. Skadi comes from the mountains and marries Njord. Gerda, daughter of Gymea, becomes the beloved of Freya. The fence between the gods and the Jotnar is therefore not a fence between two unrelated species. It is a boundary crossed by kinship, bargaining, desire, insult, and old obligation. The word Jotun may carry the memory of appetite, of one who consumes. In the stories, the Jotnar often hold what the gods need, but cannot make within their own walls. They possess old knowledge, strong drink, strange animals, and powers rooted in weather and landscape. A giant may be an enemy, but a giant may also be a host, an ancestor, or the keeper of a question Odin is willing to risk himself to ask. Jotunheim is commonly placed eastward, beyond rivers and wild ground. Utgard, the outer enclosure, belongs to the same imaginative direction, beyond Midgard's familiar limits, where measures no longer behave as a traveler expects. The road there is not marked by a modern border. It is felt when cultivated ground gives way to forest, when a mountain fills the horizon, or when a night's shelter turns out to be something else entirely. Thor once traveled east with Loki and two human companions, Thjalfi and Roskva. At night they found a great empty hall. One side opened broadly, while a smaller chamber lay farther in. They settled there as the earth shook around them. In the morning, they discovered a sleeping being of enormous size. His name was Skrymir. The hall had been his glove, and the small chamber where the travelers had taken refuge was its thumb. The story continues through contests at Utgard, where eating, running, drinking, wrestling, and lifting are concealed tests against fire, thought, the sea, old age, and the world serpent. Thor and his companions appear to fail because the terms have been hidden from them. Only afterward does their host explain what they had truly faced. This is one of Jotunheim's recurring qualities. The land does not merely contain larger creatures, it makes ordinary judgment unreliable. A drinking horn reaches into the sea. A grey cat is the Midgard serpent in disguise. An old woman is age itself. A house is a glove. The tale is comic in places, but its scale is serious. Within Midgard, a person can measure a field by walking it, judge a cup by lifting it, and recognize a roof by its beams. Beyond the fence, those habits remain useful, but they are no longer sufficient. The traveler is not foolish for misreading the world. The world has been arranged to exceed the traveler. That does not make Jotunheim a realm of simple chaos. Skrymir carries provisions. Utgard has a hall, seats, customs, and a ruler. The outer world has its own enclosures. What changes is whose order a visitor has entered. For listeners in medieval Iceland, the distinction between settled land and the country beyond it was not abstract. A farmstead required maintained walls, known paths, grazing rights, and neighbors who remembered boundaries. Mountains, glaciers, and interior wastes stood close enough to be seen, but not easily possessed. Myth gave those edges inhabitants. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Thor and his companions spent the night inside what they believed was a hall, choosing the narrow inner room when the ground began to shake. At dawn, the giant Skrymir reached down and picked up the whole shelter. It was only his glove, and their safest chamber had been the thumb. It was only his glove, and their safest chamber had been the thumb. After the strange scale of Jotunheim, Vanaheim seems quiet for a different reason. The surviving sources say little about its landscape. Its importance comes through the people associated with it and through the memory of a war that ended not in annihilation, but in exchange. The Vanir are a family of gods distinct from the Aesir. Modern summaries often divide them neatly, the Aesir as gods of rule and conflict, the Vanir as gods of fertility, wealth, and fruitful land. The stories encourage some of that distinction, but the boundary is not complete. These are not two tidy departments. They are groups whose histories became entangled. The old poems remember a first war in the world, a conflict between Aesir and Vanir. Its causes and sequence vary with the source and interpretation. What remains steady is the settlement. Hostages crossed between the groups, and peace was made through people who would live on the other side. Enclosure came from the Vanir to the Aesir. With him were his children, Freyr and Freyja. In return, the Aesir sent Honia, and in one account the wise Mimir traveled with him. These exchanges were not decorative gestures. In societies where agreements depended upon households and reputation, a hostage could embody a treaty. Peace was given a face, a place at the table, and a life exposed to the good faith of former enemies. Enclosure is associated with the sea, sailing, fishing, wealth, and favorable winds. His home among the gods is Notun, the enclosure or place of ships. Yet the marriage story of Enclosure and Skadi shows how sharply two landscapes can disagree. Skadi belongs to the mountains. Enclosure belongs near the shore. They attempt to divide their time between his home at Notun and hers at Thrymheim. At the sea, Skadi is troubled by the cries of gulls. In the mountains, Enclosure cannot bear the howling of wolves. Neither home becomes comfortable merely because a marriage has joined them. The story is sometimes told as a failure, but it also preserves something gentler. Place matters. Affection and treaty cannot make every person sleep well in every landscape. The sound that means home to one listener can keep another awake. Freyr receives Alfheim, and he is linked with prosperity, peace, rain, sunshine, and the good season of the earth. Freyja is linked with desire, precious things, magic, and the honored dead. By the time the stories were written down, these figures belonged fully within the shared society of the gods. Their Vanir origin had not vanished, but neither had it prevented belonging. Vanaheim itself remains difficult to draw. It is named as a homeland, yet its roads, halls, and borders receive little description. That absence is worth preserving. A realm can matter because people came from it, even when the surviving record does not let us walk through its gates. The peace between divine families also unsettles the idea that the Norse cosmos is held together only by battle. Its order depends on negotiated settlement. Enemies exchange representatives. New kinships are recognized. The old difference remains in names and memory, while daily life continues under a broader roof. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Njord's hall was called Notun, the place of ships. We can imagine its threshold carrying the ordinary evidence of a shore, damp rope, weathered timber, and a pale line of dried salt left behind when sea water had been tracked in and the floor had slowly warmed. We can imagine its threshold carrying the ordinary evidence of a shore, damp rope, weathered timber, and a pale line of dried salt left behind when sea water had been tracked in and the floor had slowly warmed. Alfheim is another realm whose name is clearer than its geography. In the Prose Edda, it is called a dwelling of the light elves. In an older poem, the gods give Alfheim to Freyr as a tooth gift, a present for a child's first tooth. Beyond those brief notices, the map fades quickly. The light elves are described in radiant terms. Other passages speak of dark elves below the earth, although the relationship between elves, dark elves, and dwarfs is not consistent enough to turn into a firm modern classification. The sources offer overlapping names, poetic contrasts, and later explanations. They do not provide a field guide. This uncertainty is part of the subject. Elves appear at the edge of many categories. They can be named beside the gods. They are connected with place, ancestry, beauty, danger, and offerings. Later Scandinavian folklore carries many beings called elves, hidden people, or land spirits, but centuries of change separate those traditions from the poems copied in medieval Iceland. It would be easy to fill Alfheim with details borrowed from modern fantasy. Towers, courts, uniforms, and precise ranks could be invented in an afternoon. The older material resists that fullness. It gives light, a divine recipient, and a name ending in home. Freyr's association with Alfheim is suggestive. He belongs to good seasons, peace, rain, sunshine, and the fruitfulness of land. A realm connected to him may have carried ideas of brightness and flourishing, but suggestion must remain suggestion. The manuscript does not unfold a tour of Freyr's elven estate. For people living close to cultivated land, unseen presence did not require a distant kingdom. A mound, grove, spring, field edge, or stone could gather memory and care. Offerings could make a relationship with a place visible without explaining every being thought to inhabit it. Archaeology can sometimes recover the containers and deposits left by ritual action. It cannot reliably supply the exact name a person whispered, or tell us that one bowl belonged to an elf rather than an ancestor, god, or local power. Material evidence is strongest when it shows practice, and weakest when we demand a complete mythology from a single object. So Alfheim remains in half-light, not because it was unimportant, but because importance and description are not the same thing. A short poetic reference may have been enough for an audience already carrying stories that never reached our manuscripts. That is one reason the 9 worlds cannot be recovered as 9 equally furnished rooms. Midgard has walls and human origins. Asgard has halls and roads. Jotunheim has journeys and contests. Alfheim has a few bright lines, and then the page becomes quiet. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. An offering does not need to be large to mark attention. Picture a shallow bowl placed near the edge of a field, holding a little ale or milk. By morning, mist has beaded along its rim, while the person who set it there has left no written explanation at all. By morning, mist has beaded along its rim, while the person who set it there has left no written explanation at all. Below the bright uncertainty of Alfheim, the language of the sources becomes crowded again. Dark elves are placed under the earth. Dwarfs live in stone or soil and appear in named companies. Nidavellir, the dark fields, and Svartalfheim, the home of dark elves, enter later attempts to arrange the worlds. Whether these names describe distinct regions, overlapping ideas, or different labels used in different passages cannot be settled into one clean diagram. The beings associated with these lower places are known less through landscape than through work. Dwarfs forge, shape, measure, and enchant. Their products pass upward into the lives of gods, where they become some of the most recognizable objects in Norse myths. Odin carries Gungnir, the spear that does not fail its purpose. He possesses Draupnir, the gold ring from which 8 rings of equal weight drop every 9th night. Freyja has Skidbladnir, a ship large enough to hold the gods with their equipment, yet made so that it can be folded and carried when not in use. Sif receives hair made from gold after Loki cuts away her own. And Thor receives Mjolnir. These objects are often described by their wonders, but the stories also remember workshops, wages, bellows, heat, interruption, and flaws. Loki sets craftsmen against one another and risks his own head in the bargain. While the dwarf Sindri places work in the fire, his brother Brock works the bellows and is warned not to stop. A fly bites Brock as he labors. At the final forging, the bellows pause just long enough to leave Thor's hammer with a shorter handle than intended. The flaw does not make Mjolnir useless. The gods judge it the strongest defense against the frost giants. Thor learns its balance, grips it with iron gloves, and carries it with a belt of strength. An imperfectly finished object becomes indispensable. This is not the same as saying the old stories celebrate careless work. Quite the opposite. They pay attention to process because process matters. Bellows must keep air moving. Metal must remain at heat. A hand that leaves its task for a moment may change the final form forever. In a real smithy, craft was physical knowledge. Ore, charcoal, bloom, slag, hammer, anvil, and repeated heating transformed stubborn material through practiced judgment. The mythic objects exceed ordinary craft, but their stories remain grounded in labor. Even magic has a workshop. Skidbladnir offers another image of impossible workmanship. Its sails always find a favorable wind, and after a voyage, the whole ship can be folded like cloth. The wonder depends upon 2 opposite qualities held together: immense capacity and perfect portability. A seagoing haul becomes something that can be tucked away. Draupnir also makes abundance through measured repetition. It does not spill shapeless treasure. Every 9th night, it produces 8 rings of the same weight. The marvel is regular. Its wealth arrives according to a count. Sif's replacement here begins with a violation. Loki removes something living and personal, then must seek a crafted remedy. The dwarfs make strands of gold that grow upon her head, like natural hair. The result crosses the line between artifact and body, just as their ship crosses the line between structure and folded fabric. These crafted things connect realms. Materials and makers below the earth equip the gods above it. Thor's defense of Midgard depends upon a hammer made elsewhere. Freya's travel depends upon another workshop's ship. Odin's authority is marked by spear and ring, whose makers do not sit in Asgard's high seats. The arrangement complicates every hierarchy. The gods possess the treasures, but they do not possess all useful skill. They bargain, threaten, deceive, and depend. Power is distributed through objects, and objects carry the memory of hands that their owners may prefer not to honor. The lower worlds are therefore not empty cellars beneath the story. They are places of transformation. Raw matter enters heat and darkness. It returns as a tool, weapon, ornament, vehicle, or sign of rank. The route between worlds may be a bridge or route, but it may also be the path taken by a finished thing from a hidden bench to a god's open hand. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. When Sif's new hair was made, gold had to imitate something finer than a chain or crown. Imagine a smith drawing and working the metal until one bright shaving curls from the surface, thin enough to lift in the warmth above the bench before settling beside the hammer. Imagine a smith drawing and working the metal until one bright shaving curls from the surface, thin enough to lift in the warmth above the bench before settling beside the hammer. The heat of a workshop is controlled. The fires at the far edge of the Norse cosmos are not. Muspelheim belongs to burning brightness and to powers that will one day move against the ordered worlds. Niflheim belongs to mist, cold, and the ancient spring Virgilmere from which rivers flow. In the creation story, warmth from Muspelheim meets the rime moving out from Niflheim across Ginnungagap. Life begins at their contact. These realms are therefore more than destinations on a map. They are conditions: fire without a hearth, cold without shelter, forces whose meeting makes form possible and whose release can unmake it. Hel is harder to place because the name belongs both to a being and to her domain. She is a daughter of Loki, sent by Odin to rule over those who die of sickness or old age. Her hall and household are described with severe names, but her realm is not simply the Christian place of punishment that the English word hell now suggests. The resemblance between the words is real, and Christian ideas were present in the culture that preserved our prose accounts. Yet the Norse material does not sort every dead person into a single reward or punishment system. The slain may go to Odin or Freyja. People may remain associated with burial mounds, family, sea, or other destinations. Hell receives many whose deaths are ordinary. Niflheim appears as a still deeper or darker destination in some passages. The names Hel, Niflheim, and Niflheim overlap in ways that later charts often flatten. It is safer to keep the distinctions provisional than to pretend every manuscript passage belongs to one stable geography. The road to Hel is most clearly traveled in the story of Balder. After Balder's death, Hermod rides Odin's horse Sleipnir for 9 nights through valleys so dark that he can see nothing. He reaches the river Gjol and a bridge roofed with shining gold. Its keeper, Midgard, hears that his horse makes more noise than the company of dead people who crossed before him. Hermod continues northward and downward until he reaches Hel's gate. Sleipnir carries him over it. Inside, Balder sits in a place of honor. Hel agrees that he may return only if everything in the world weeps for him. The attempt nearly succeeds. Gods, people, animals, earth, stones, trees, and metals are asked to weep. One figure refuses, and Balder remains with Hel until the world's renewal. This journey gives the underworld distance and procedure. There are nights of travel, a river, a bridge, a gate, a guardian, a ruler, and terms that must be carried back. Death is not treated as a blank disappearance. It has roads and thresholds, although they are not roads the living usually take. The story also makes grief material. The whole world is asked to respond. Metal can weep with moisture. Stone can hold water. Whether every tear is sincere becomes the condition of return. Fire and mist stand at both ends of the larger story. Their meeting helps form the first being. At Ragnarok, fire crosses the worlds again. Between those moments, people live by making smaller versions manageable. Flame inside a hearth, cold beyond a wall, water carried in a vessel, the dead approached through burial and memory. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Hermod rode for 9 nights through valleys without light before he reached the bridge over Yggdrasil. Beyond its gold roof, the road did not rise toward a shining summit. It continued northward and down into mist, toward a gate his horse would have to leap. It continued northward and down into mist, toward a gate his horse would have to leap. Other roads follow a tree. Yggdrasil is the great ash whose branches spread over the worlds and whose roots reach into different regions of the cosmos. It is often presented as the organizing image of Norse mythology, a living structure joining what no flat map can comfortably arrange. But Yggdrasil is not a polished diagram. It is inhabited, damaged, watered, bitten, and tended. One route reaches toward the gods and the Well of Erd. One extends toward the frost giants and Mimir's well, where wisdom is held. Another reaches into Niflheim toward Hvergelmir, where the serpent Nidhogg gnaws below. The accounts do not align perfectly in every detail. That is familiar by now. What remains powerful is the image of roots crossing boundaries that surface roads cannot. The tree joins divine assembly, giant wisdom, and underworld waters without making them identical. At the Well of Erd, the Norns shape lives and lay down law. The gods ride there to hold counsel. The place is both a source of water and a place where decisions accumulate. The tree itself requires care. The Norns draw water from the well and combine it with the pale material around it, spreading the mixture over the ash so that its branches do not wither or decay. Older translations call it white clay. The exact substance is less important than the action. The cosmic tree survives because someone tends it repeatedly. That detail changes the mood of the whole structure. Yggdrasil is not a machine set running at creation. It is closer to a maintained living thing. Its endurance depends upon visits to water, hands carrying what is needed, and work performed again. Meanwhile, harm continues. An eagle sits high in the branches with a hawk between its eyes. The squirrel Ratatosk travels up and down the trunk, carrying hostile words between the eagle above and Nidhogg below. 4 stags browse among the shoots. Serpents lie beneath. In one poem, the ash suffers more than people understand. Deer bite above, decay works at its side, and Nidhogg cuts below. The world tree is alive not because nothing touches it, but because feeding, injury, growth, message, and repair happen together. Dew falls from it into the valleys. Creatures shelter within it. The name Yggdrasil is commonly understood as Odin's horse, a poetic reference to the gallows and to Odin's self-hanging in pursuit of the runes. The tree carries cosmology, weather, animal life, law, suffering, and knowledge in one image without becoming only one of them. Modern illustrations often show 9 small worlds hanging from branches like labeled ornaments. Such pictures can help a new reader remember names, but they should not be mistaken for a medieval master plan. The texts tell us that Yggdrasil reaches widely. They do not provide a single drawing with 9 fixed circles in agreed positions. The tree works better as a set of relationships. Roots connect to wells, gods travel to assembly, a serpent damages what the Norns preserve, news moves between top and bottom, water rises and dew descends. Every direction carries a task or a consequence. For an audience familiar with timber, such a tree would not have been an abstraction. Wood-framed houses and ships became bowls and tool handles, burned for heat and weathered under rain. A great ash could represent continuity while still showing every sign of vulnerability. The quiet lesson is not that the cosmos is permanent. The poems never promise that. The lesson is that endurance can be active. A thing lasts because injury is answered with care, even when no repair is final. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. At Urd's well, the Norns do not merely pronounce distant fates. They draw water and pale earth, carry it to Yggdrasil, and coat the great ash so its wood will not fail. Somewhere beneath them, a root is being gnawed, and still the morning work is done. Somewhere beneath them, a root is being gnawed, and still the morning work is done. The worlds of Norse myth are separate enough to require journeys and connected enough for journeys to matter. Bifrost carries gods between Asgard and the place of assembly. Thor takes rivers instead. Hermod rides downward toward Hel. Odin travels in disguise to seek knowledge. Giants cross into divine enclosures, and gods go east into giant country. Freyr owns a folding ship. The dead sail, ride, walk, or are carried according to different stories and rites. There is no single system of transport because there is no single kind of border. A bridge crosses open space and can be watched. A river marks a limit, but also offers a route along its banks. A route passes invisibly through soil. A horse gives speed and allows a rider to endure distance. A ship turns water from obstruction into road. Each path changes the story told upon it. Bifrost is bright, guarded, and vulnerable. The road to Hel is dark and measured by nights. The sea route depends on wind, hull, seam, sail, and the judgment of people who cannot see beneath the water. Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, crosses boundaries other horses cannot. Hermod rides him over Hel's gate. Odin rides him to meetings and contests. The horse's unusual body makes movement itself a sign that ordinary limits are being exceeded. Travel also leaves evidence. In the story of Hermod, the guardian at Gjol Bridge distinguishes his living passage by sound and weight. He rides alone, yet the bridge rings more loudly beneath him than it did beneath the dead who crossed in a company. That small observation makes the supernatural route physical. Hooves strike a surface. A keeper listens. The living traveler has weight. At the world's edges, roads are not always safe. Bifrost will break when the forces of Muspel ride over it. The best bridge still has a load it cannot bear. Skidbladnir always finds wind, but another ship, Naglfar, belongs to the final destruction. The same form that carries a household or expedition can carry danger. For seafaring communities, movement joined practical knowledge with uncertainty. A voyage required preparation before the shore disappeared. Food, water, cordage, repair material, clothing, and attention to season. Mythic ships remove one difficulty or enlarge another, but they remain recognizable as ships because the ordinary form was already full of consequence. So the 9 worlds are better imagined through an itinerary than an atlas. To know a realm is to know what must be crossed, who guards the crossing, what vehicle can survive it, and whether a return remains possible. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. At the bridge over Yggdrasil, Midgard could hear the difference between the dead and a living rider. Sleipnir's hooves struck the gold-roofed crossing with unexpected weight, leaving the keeper to look down the road after one traveler who was still warm enough to return. Sleipnir's hooves struck the gold-roofed crossing with unexpected weight, leaving the keeper to look down the road after one traveler who was still warm enough to return. At Ragnarok, return becomes uncertain. The old poems describe a sequence of losses, a terrible winter, the breaking of bonds, enemies moving toward the gods, the sun darkened, the earth shaking, and fire reaching across the world. Familiar roads fail under unfamiliar traffic. Bifrost breaks when the sons of Muspel ride over it. This is often retold as one grand battle, but its force comes from the undoing of ordinary assurances. Kinship fails, seasons fail, boundaries fail, creatures once held at the edges move inward. The gods meet what they have long known is coming. Odin faces the wolf Fenrir, Thor meets the Midgard serpent, Freya faces Surtur without the sword he once gave away. Heimdall and Loki confront one another. The poems do not linger over victory. Even successful blows carry death with them. Thor kills Jormungandr, then walks 9 steps before falling from its venom. The number is measured quietly. 9 steps are enough to move away from the body, not enough to reach another world. The scene can be narrated without turning it into spectacle. It is the closing of relationships established across the entire mythic cycle: guardian and threat, thunderer and serpent, ruler and wolf, bright god and fire. Then the earth sinks into the sea, and then it rises again. The renewed earth is green, fields bear crops without being sown, surviving gods meet and remember, Balder and Hodder return from hell. In the grass, the younger generation finds the golden game pieces once owned by the gods before them. Memory is part of renewal. The new world does not begin by forgetting the old one. 2 human beings, Lif and Yggdrasil, survive in a wooded refuge called Hodmir's Holt. During the fire, they remain concealed, and morning dew is their food. From them, the human line continues. Their survival is not described through a fortress filled with treasure. It depends on shelter, concealment, and the smallest recurring moisture. Dew is enough because it arrives again. This ending does not erase the losses before it, nor does it promise that the renewed world is simply the first world restored to its former arrangement. What returns has passed through destruction. The surviving gods carry memory. The human pair emerges from hiding. The fields become fruitful in a way that sounds both generous and strange. Ragnarok also reminds us why the cosmic roads mattered. A bridge can break because it connected places. A serpent can rise because it encircled the inhabited world. Fire can arrive because the edge was never absolute. The same connectedness that allows knowledge, marriage, craft, and travel also allows danger to move. The Norse cosmos is not saved by sealing every realm apart. It ends, and life continues afterward. Here is the detail to carry with you into sleep. Lif and Lifthrasia wait beneath the sheltering wood while fire passes over the worlds. They carry no banquet with them in the surviving verse. In the quiet after, they live on morning dew, gathering the new day's water before it disappears from the leaves. In the quiet after, they live on morning dew, gathering the new day's water before it disappears from the leaves. We have traveled through 13 chapters and more than 9 names, which is fitting. The surviving sources say 9 worlds, but they do not stop to hand us one agreed list. Midgard and Asgard stand clearly in the stories. Jotunheim has roads, rulers, and dangerous hospitality. Vanaheim and Alfheim are named with fewer details. Niflheim, Muspelheim, Hel, Niflhel, Nidavellir, and Svartalfheim overlap the work of cold, fire, death, darkness, and craft. Yggdrasil reaches through them without arranging them into a schoolroom chart. The material reached us through layers. Many stories lived first in performance, poems spoken and remembered, altered by voice, audience, and occasion. In 13th century Iceland, manuscripts preserved poems whose language and subject could be older than the pages carrying them. The manuscript, now called the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda, was written around 1270. Its collection is indispensable, but it is not a recording made in the Viking Age. Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda was composed earlier in that century, around 1220 or 1230, as a guide to poetry and the mythic language older verse required. Snorri wrote in a Christian society about pre-Christian material. His explanations preserve stories we might otherwise have lost, while also arranging them for his own purpose and time. Even the manuscripts of the Prose Edda differ. Scribes copied, selected, corrected, and sometimes expanded. Modern editors compare those witnesses and make choices. Translators make more choices when one Old Norse word does not settle comfortably into one English word. Archaeology adds another kind of record. Amulets shaped like Thor's hammer, carved stones, burials, halls, ships, place names, and ritual deposits show that myth existed among objects and landscapes. Yet an object rarely comes with a complete explanation. A hammer pendant can support claims about symbols and identity. It cannot by itself draw the 9 worlds. The clean circular maps found in modern books and online are therefore reconstructions. Some are thoughtful teaching tools. None should be mistaken for a surviving Norse original. The medieval record gives relationships, directions, journeys, enclosures, and routes. Modern hands choose where to place the circles. That does not make the maps worthless. It makes them interpretations, like this episode. The honest question is not whether interpretation can be avoided. It is whether the interpreter shows where the evidence ends. Tonight, we began with a blank manuscript margin. It remains blank. No hidden medieval chart has appeared there. But the absence of a chart no longer means an absence of structure. We found Midgard in the act of enclosure. We found Asgard through halls and a bridge. Jotunheim began beyond the familiar fence, where a glove could become a house. Vanaheim survived in a treaty and the movement of hostages. Alfheim remained a few lines of brightness. The lower places revealed themselves through crafted things brought upward. Hel's country had a road, river, keeper, and gate. At the center, if center is the right word, Yggdrasil was never still. Its roots reached wells and darkness. Animals moved through its branches. A serpent damaged it. The Norns kept tending it. That may be the most faithful way to hold the Norse worlds in mind. not as 9 colored compartments, but as places made meaningful by what passes between them. Kin crosses from giants to gods, hostages carry peace, dwarfs send finished treasures out of hidden workshops, a rider enters the country of the dead and returns with terms, water rises from wells and falls again as dew. At the ending, roads break, the earth sinks, and green land rises once more. The archive preserves fragments because fragments are what survived. Their edges do not need to be sanded away. A missing list can remain missing. 2 names can remain difficult to reconcile. An uncertain realm can stay in half-light. Outside the imagined manuscript room, night has settled over the ordinary world. Somewhere, water is gathering on grass. Timber is cooling. A road continues beyond the last visible gate, whether or not anyone has drawn it. That's where I'll close the file for tonight. The archive will be here tomorrow. It always is. Sleep well.